when you're an introvert, you have your own superpowers, but they are more understated. They're more quiet. They're not as in your face for some who have that extroversion. And so, depending on where you are, people can say, oh, they're always quiet or they don't have presence. They never speak up. And they can be overlooked, right? And so that's why it's so important to have this conversation continually, especially for folks who are introverted.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Frustrated to Fluent. I'm your host, Devon Bruce, and we help non-native English speakers in healthcare communicate effectively with their patients, colleagues, and staff. And today I'm speaking with Nicole Chamblin. She's an ICF PCC credential coach who works with very high achieving leaders and entrepreneurs to cultivate a rise and thrive mindset. Now, she leverages insights from her own personal cancer journey and business experience, along with her background in psychology and communications, to inspire her clients to recover from setbacks, regain confidence, and do more with less stress, drama, and burnout. So, Nicole, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Devin, for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yes, I'm so excited about this conversation because we're talking about introverts and how introverts in healthcare can communicate effectively. And the reason why that I'm excited to talk about this is because of some of the things that I think have changed over the years, and I'd love your insights on this. So, for example, when I have asked multiple people, about what introverts can do, especially me being very extroverted, some people have gotten offended by that label. Or they're like, we need to let go of these labels and we need to structure this in a different way. But on the other hand, whenever I write about how introverts can gain confidence or how introverts can speak up in meetings on LinkedIn, those posts do very well. And I constantly get people in my message box saying, Devin, thank you so much for talking about this, or this really helped me. So it's like, on the one hand, it's getting offensive to be labeled an introvert. But then on the other hand, the people who do classify themselves as an introvert, they like that they're being helped. So just jumping right in, like I said, I know that this term can be offensive to some and they don't like it. So I'd love to know, what's your definition of an introvert? And then also, if you've noticed any changes around the term over the years, and if so, what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for that question. So introversion to me is, it's an identifier. Do you have black hair and blue eyes? Are you tall? Are you short? It's another identifier, right? So when I hear from someone that they're an introvert, it gives me insight into how I can adjust the way I communicate with them. So for me, the difference between introversion and extroversion, it is, where do you get your energy? Extroverts are energized by spending more time with people, that external stimulation. And introverts are energized by introspection, time alone, one-on-one time. That's how they recharge their batteries. And so, first of all, let me let anyone who's listening know that I am an introvert. I've measured as an introvert on every scale. And so for me, this is an area that I've had to really learn how to navigate, especially I'm a coach, I'm a speaker, I'm in front of groups all the time. If you had told me when I was 16, 17 that I would make my living being in front of large groups, I would have laughed at you because there was no way I could have pictured myself being continually in that environment. And so I've had to learn, because of the work that I love doing, how to adjust it. So introversion sometimes gets a bad rap. And part of it is because it's like a 3-to-1 ratio, right? It's 3 extroverts for every 1 introvert. And most jobs, success measures are designed to reward the extrovert, if you will, like speaking up, being bold, taking risks, like having big presence. And so when you're an introvert, you have your own superpowers, but they are more understated. They're more quiet. They're not as in your face for some who have that extroversion. And so, depending on where you are, people can say, oh, they're always quiet or they don't have presence. They never speak up. And they can be overlooked, right? And so that's why it's so important to have this conversation continually, especially for folks who are introverted. Some of the things that I've seen a huge shift in the last few years
Mhm.
as a result of the pandemic. And when I trained, there's a course that I had that I would talk with folks about it. Like at the start of the pandemic, a lot of my extroverted clients were freaking out because they were isolated. They were at home. They didn't have people to talk to. They weren't in person. So their batteries were draining really fast because they didn't have that stimulation that they needed, while the introverts were thriving. They were like, no one's bugging me. I'm here. And they actually did really well because they had that internal focus, that time that they could do what they needed to do. So it was a real insight and lesson. A lot of my extroverted clients who were leaders were like, is this how my team members feel who are introverted when they're in office and their batteries are draining because we're all coming at them? So it was a really good insight. So being introverted is about where do you get energized, and being good at that process is how do you recharge your batteries quickly when you have to be out there, because we have to be out there. We have to engage. We have to be with others. So we've got to figure out how to like do a fast, rapid charge so we can get back out there quicker.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because it's not just, oh, introverts are just quiet. It seems like there's a lot more that goes along with that definition.
Yeah. There's some studies in neuroscience that have actually noticed differences in the brain's structure of introverts and extroverts. And so neither are right or wrong, right? And that's the most important thing I want your introverted listeners to know, is that there's nothing wrong with being an introvert.
Nope.
Matter of fact, being an introvert gives you superpowers. And I actually have a class that I teach. One of my client groups, and this has like become one of the most popular classes. I've taught it to hundreds and hundreds of folks just in the last couple of months alone. And it's how do you communicate in confidence using introverted superpowers, even if you're not an introvert, right? Because introverts are great listeners, right? And listening is, they tell you, it's one of the most important communication skill sets that we can develop. Well, introverts already have that naturally. They're great listeners. And so they're reading the body language, they're paying attention, they're super observant. And because they're introspective, they're able to process and analyze things internally very quickly and come out with a different answer than someone else might, because they've taken note of all of the nuances of the conversation, the body language. They're listening for what's not being said. And so they pick up on a lot. Where I see some of my introverted clients challenge, and frankly, where I was challenged for a while, was like, how do you process that
Yeah.
quickly and then come up with that thing that you can like, bleh, like put out there, right? And so it is practice. It is being willing to be uncomfortable with saying the thing that's in your mind, because 9 times out of 10, someone else in the room is thinking it and not saying it. Or your extroverted counterparts, they've missed it. They don't see it. So you're going to bring something new and fresh to that conversation. It just has to make its way out. And so that's the practice part.
I'm glad that you said that just because, like I said, whenever I write something about introverts on LinkedIn, they do quite well. And so you're right. I feel like introverts have amazing superpowers when it comes to communicating effectively, especially for non native English speakers in healthcare, because a lot of them feel like they have to either be someone that they're not, or they have to change a fundamental aspect of their personality in
Mhm.
order to be deemed as worthy to be in the room. And that is not true at all. I always feel like everyone has the right to be who they are meant to be. And so I'm really glad that you touched on that. Now, kind of piggybacking off of that, what are some common misconceptions about introverts when it comes to communication?
Some of the things that I've seen is that they don't know, which is why they're quiet, right? That they're not speaking up because they don't have the answer, which is absolutely wrong. Usually, the introverts have all the answers. They know it. They've got the right answer in their back pocket. They have different perspectives. They're just not verbalizing that. It's the projection of confidence, right? And so there's so many really good books out right now, especially around leaders who are introverts, right? Because typically folks don't see introverts as natural leaders, but they can
Mhm.
be just as successful, if not more so in some cases, right? And so people assume that they don't have those leadership skills and qualities. They may be overlooked for promotion, they may be overlooked for special projects because they're not doing self promotion. They're not the ones that are in the front of the room. So they naturally look to an extrovert in some cases, or those who have those extroverted tendencies.
Mhm.
And so introverts are often, super analytical, and that analytical ability allows them to problem solve in creative ways because they're turning over all these different opportunities in their head, like problem solving in their head. And so if you give them that chance and invite them into the conversation, they have solutions to problems that extroverts might miss. Now, I don't want my extroverted folks to feel like I am knocking them. I am not. There's a place for
Right.
everyone at the table,
100%.
right? But since we're talking to our more introverted clientele right now, it's important for them to understand, like, they sometimes it's the internal conversation that introverts have with themselves, talking themselves out of things, talking themselves out of taking risks, talking themselves out of saying, something. And to the point that you say, especially for non-native speakers, second guessing themselves
Mm-hmm.
continually. And so the language that they use when they do speak becomes apologetic, right? I'm sorry, but I'm just. And so they minimize the strength of what they're bringing forward by apologizing first before they say anything. And
Right.
so when you do that, when you say, I'm sorry, I'm just, I'm not sure, right? When you have those qualifiers before the thing that you're about to say, you basically like drew a red line through everything that you said. So it diminishes the power of your communication. And so those are some of the things that I see my introverted clients doing. And like I said, things that I used to do all the time that I've had to learn, keep that in my head
Yeah.
and just say the part afterwards out loud.
I'm so glad that you touched on that, because you're right. People in healthcare who are non-native speakers, they do second question themselves, especially when they're introverted, because not only are they quote unquote battling them being introverted, but then English is not their first language. And so they just really feel like they don't have the skills, which is not true at all. So I'm actually going to ask you a couple of questions about what non-native English speakers can do in healthcare. So, for example, how can introverted healthcare professionals prepare for important conversations like giving a diagnosis or speaking up in a team meeting, especially when their nerves are high, like they're really anxious about speaking?
Some of my favorite ways to calm down. So I'm going to also share, while I am a native English speaker, I am Jamaican, so I grew up hearing patois and I speak Spanish. And so I remember my days of trying to get comfortable speaking in Spanish and the lack of confidence that I had to open my mouth. So a lot of times I'd be afraid to say something until I finally had an environment of folks that I could trust. And so what I would say is find those folks that you have rapport with or you can trust to be comfortable enough to speak maybe a little broken until you realize, oh, I do know the word, right? Because you want to get to the space where you're not second guessing the words that are coming out of your mouth. And so if you have someone that you can practice with who you can trust, speaking more in English, or if you're like, I don't have anyone, talk to everyone you meet in English. The person making your sandwich, the guy
Yeah.
standing at you in the next, like, just keep practicing English as much as you can. Listen to English language music, watch the news in English. That's because it helps you get used to hearing the words, and that trains your brain to recognize those words. And then I would do a conversation. It sounds really crazy, but if you're playing the TV or watching something in English, have a conversation back, right? Answer out loud in English to help you get used to. Our brains are super lazy, and so they like to automate things. And the more you practice something, the more you train your brain to do that thing. So the more you get used to speaking in English, even for the littlest things, out loud, so you hear it, right? It again, your brain is hearing your voice speak, it builds your confidence. The other thing I would say is practice breathing exercises. There's some simple breathing exercises that you can do to calm yourself in the moment, because when we get nervous and we get anxious, our brain and our body responds like we're in threat state, right? Like we're, oh my gosh, I'm afraid. And so that makes it even harder to say that thing. So practice taking just a couple of deep calming breaths, because that tells your brain we're not at threat. We don't have to be fearful. We're okay. And when we calm that limbic response down, then we can have a more rational conversation. It can be easier for us to say that thing. And the other thing that I would say is remember that English is one of the hardest languages to learn, right? Sometimes, even as a native speaker, it doesn't make sense to me.
So true.
So, right? So you're doing something that's already hard. You are learning and navigating professionally in another language that's not your own. You know multiple languages. That should be a boost of confidence for non-native speakers, because quite frankly, most folks here in the States don't speak a second language, right? And I
True.
think the superpower of being able to think in multiple languages is an incredible and should be an incredible confidence booster, so that I'm good enough. I'm doing hard things. I can do something else that's hard.
I
But
completely agree.
practicing, speaking it, listening to the music as much as you can, like, sing along. It helps your body and your brain get comfortable saying the words in that language.
I love this because I'm a big component of practicing in safe spaces because
Mhm.
a lot of people, not just not just people in healthcare, but just in general, they try to practice in high pressure environments or high pressure
Yeah.
situations. That's not
Mhm.
the time to practice. You have to feel
Exactly.
safe enough to be vulnerable to make mistakes. Because one of the biggest things, and I'm sure you can attest to this, that they don't want to make mistakes. They don't want to look bad. But if you're in a safe environment, like you said,
Mhm.
immersing yourself in English as much as possible outside of the healthcare field, that's going to help immensely, along with breathing in the moment to just kind of calm your
Yeah.
nerves down. That's great advice. So I thank you for saying that because sometimes people think that they need more grammar or they need to take a bunch of English classes again. And it's like, no, you're already fluent. You're using it every day in
Mhm.
healthcare. So these are things that go beyond
Yeah.
just, I need to perfect my grammar when it's usually not the case, especially for the people listening, because like I said, they're fluent and extremely fluent for some. Now, I'm glad that you did say something about um, of like trying to find your voice or trying to compete with
Mhm.
louder personalities. I'd love to ask you this question on that because healthcare, depending on what they do, as you know, it can be very, very fast paced. So,
Yeah.
how can introverts find their voice without feeling like they have to compete with louder personalities?
And so that's definitely something. You don't have to try to match their energy, right? That first thing. If anything, one of the things that I learned that I found surprising, the quieter and calmer you are when you're communicating, the more people will listen to you,
That part.
right?
Yes.
So, you know, it was something that I learned to master. I used to work in, Hispanic advertising and marketing agency where Spanish was spoken 95% of the time in the office. And this is where I wasn't comfortable. I wasn't confident. And I was like, I felt like I was jumping double dutch trying to get into the conversation, right? Jumping rope. And what I started to learn, especially if someone is speaking over you, is just continue speaking. Don't let them stop you. So, whatever it is you're saying, keep saying it. Keep your voice modulated, like calm but strong with strengths. Let me finish my thoughts. I am not done speaking. Here's what I want to add to the conversation, right? Practice these phrases to give yourself confidence. Look at yourself in the mirror saying them so that extroverts, they think and it's say, like they talk to process their thoughts. So the other part is to realize that they're not intentionally being rude. It's not a power play necessarily. Extroverts talk to think. So that's how they're processing their thoughts externally, where introverts think to talk. So recognize that, oh, it's not that they're trying to cut me off as a power play or to demean me. They're just trying to process. So say, okay, hang on a second. I want to get my thought in here also so we can play off of each other, right? So don't assume it's negative. I'm not saying that might not happen sometimes, but most times it's just they're also trying to get their thought out. So recognize and say, okay, I'm glad that you shared that. Here's what I see. Here's what I think. The other thing that came to mind that I wanted to say, going back to our last point for a second, was, and my sister's a nurse and she tells me that all these, TV dramas in the hospital is not true. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But watching something that's at least familiar ish and listening to the words and the language, like the phrases they use, if they have to give a diagnosis, if they have to share news, could be a great form of practice because you can mirror that behavior. So I wanted to share
True.
that as well.
No, I'm glad that you said that. You're right. That doing that kind of mirroring is really essential because a lot of people, especially depending on their native language, they don't use their voice for clarity. Whereas in English, we do. We can say
Mhm,
the same sentence multiple times and it will have completely different meanings. So I'm really
mhm.
glad that you touched on that. That'll definitely help for sure.
I would suggest also writing down, not that there is a script, right? But coming up with phrases that lead you into your whatever it is you're going to say. Sometimes we're uncomfortable with how do we start the sentence? How do we start the conversation? So come up with a list of phrases that you can use to that you're comfortable saying. Practice saying them in the mirror. Look at your body language, your facial expression. Remember that 93% of what we communicate are the nonverbals, our tone of
Mhm.
voice, our facial expressions, our body, how we use our body when we're speaking, our hand gestures. So if you practice in front of the mirror with these lead in phrases, then what happens is your body becomes comfortable, your mind becomes comfortable, so that anything that comes after the phrase flows a little bit easier, right? If you're not struggling for how do I tell you this story? How do I start to tell you this? Just practice those, I have to share some news with you, or like I'm just making it up because I watch too much TV drama. But like whatever it is that you have to do when you are giving patient news, when you're asking questions, just practice your lead in phrases. How do you open the conversation so you feel at least more comfortable with that?
That's great. Thank you so much. And then the last question I want to ask you. So, for the non native English speaker in healthcare who's listening and they feel like I'm too quiet or I'm not good enough in my English, what would you say to encourage them right now? And also, what's one small shift that they can make today that would start building that real lasting confidence over time?
Mindset is everything. Your brain is always listening and your self-talk is important. So when we say things like, I'm not good at this, I can't learn, right? Our brain now hears, oh, I can't learn. So it makes it harder to learn. So shift your mindset. I'm not comfortable yet, right? That little powerful word yet helps your brain shift. So I'm going to practice this. This is good enough. I have everything that I need to do this. I am already good. I earned my degree. Remind yourself of all the things that you have done to get to this point and know that you have everything that you need. So I would start on the mindset because negative self talk is a confidence killer across the board. And because introverts, we are in our head a little bit more sometimes than we should be. We're repeating these things over and over and over to ourselves. The other thing that I would say, I always ask my clients, if you wouldn't say that thing in your head to someone else, you're no longer allowed to say it to you, right? So if you're going to say, oh, if you wouldn't look at your next, colleague and say, oh, you're bad at English, then you can't say that to yourself anymore. So shifting the mindset is super important. That's where confidence starts. It's an internal thing. It's not about how you look. It's not about, anything external. It starts within. So your mindset is going to be important. The other thing that I would say is consider taking a public speaking course, even if it's a one day, to get used to speaking in public. How do you use your voice? I love that comment that you made earlier about using our voice as an instrument, right? It's a tool. And so some of the things that we have to be aware of are cultural differences in communication. I have a client, for example, who is from Nigeria, and in his home country, eye contact is considered rude. And so he would avoid making eye contact with his colleagues until someone called him out on it. And they're like, you don't look people in the eye. And he's just like, I'm trying to show you respect. And they had to explain to him, not looking at people in the eye here is actually considered disrespectful. And so think about what might be some cultural influences in your communication style that might be preventing you from coming across as confident, and then work on that. I'm not saying change who you are, But for example, that client now knows here in the States, he's got to look people in the eye, but when he goes back home, he's got to go back
Yeah.
to, oh, so what's that shift that you need to do? Is it how you address your colleagues, right? Some folks are like, as a kid, you don't speak back to your elders, right? But when you're in a professional setting, you're going to come across folks from different backgrounds, different age groups, different levels. So you're going to have to get comfortable speaking to all levels. So be aware of the cultural influences that might be holding you back, and then come up with a plan. Recognize that you're not being disrespectful, but now you have to do what is expected in this workplace.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Wow, you dropped some gems today. Thank you so much, Nicole. This was great. I love it. Now, where can
You are
people find
welcome.
you online?
One of the easiest places to find me right now is either at my website, NicoleChamblin.com, or visionsps.academy. It'll point you in my direction, and I would love to connect. I have a soft spot for my heart for introverted leaders of all backgrounds, because there's so many of us out there, and introverts have so much to bring to the table, and it's a superpower. I want you to be able to stand in it and be proud of it, and let folks know everything that you have. It's necessary for us to have this blend in our organization. And so I don't want you to hide anymore. I want you to feel comfortable coming forward. And like I
Amen.
said, if I can do it, then you can do it.
100%. Yes. 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 I love that. And if you are an introverted healthcare worker and you need some additional support, you can always join our free community. It's available for anyone in healthcare, and you have additional support to help you on your English journey. The link for that is in the description box below, along with Nicole's resources as well. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on. This was a very important conversation. So grateful that you came on today.
Same. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad that our paths crossed. And I
Likewise.
hope that someone can take away at least one little thing that's going to help them be more confident tomorrow.
Definitely. Yes, that has been accomplished. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Take care.